Tonight, let's leave behind the noise of the modern world and step into a different kind of chaos. A place where the fire crackles, the ale flows, and the night hums with the sound of old songs and forgotten laughter. Imagine, it's a rainy evening in a muddy medieval village. Your boots are soaked, your cloak smells of smoke and wet wool. But ahead, through the mist, a crooked wooden building leans into the wind. A tavern. Inside, warmth and wild stories await. No menus, no reservations. Just rough benches, rougher ale, and the comforting disorder of a world long gone. Dim the lights, settle into your favorite chair, and let's wander together into a night inside a medieval tavern, where every spilled mug and every whispered tale carries you further from today and closer to dreams. You've walked through the rain, boots heavy with mud, the chill biting through every seam of your cloak. The wind tugs at your sleeves like a mischievous spirit, urging you forward. And now, standing before the weathered tavern door, you can hear the life within, the thud of a heavy mug set down on a wooden table, a chorus of laughter rolling like distant thunder, the soft crackle of a fire struggling against the damp air. You reach out, your fingers brushing the iron handles slick with rain. The door groans open, not in protest, but in welcome. A wave of warmth, smoke, and sound crashes over you. The heavy scent of wet wool, wood smoke, sour ale, and something roasting fills your senses. Inside, time seems slower, softer, 1,000 little lives tangled together under a low timber roof. Here, for a few precious hours, the cold and hunger of the outside world are forgotten. Welcome, traveler. Tonight, the tavern is your home. And every creaking chair, every flickering candle, every half-told story will be your companions until the dawn comes once again. Stepping through the door, smoke, laughter, and cold rain. The night descended like a heavy, waterlogged blanket, smothering the world in darkness. The muddy roads, scarred with ruts, glistened faintly under the dim flicker of distant lanterns. The rhythmic clop of horses' hooves echoed through the stillness, mingling with the creak of wooden cartwheels and the occasional bark of a dog reverberating from shadowed alleys. A fine, relentless rain, carried on the breath of the autumn wind, fell in heavy droplets, clinging to your tattered cloak like a persistent memory. You pulled the cloak tighter around your shoulders, your boots sinking into the mire with each step, producing a wet, squelching sound that seemed to mock your exhaustion. Life in the medieval world was never kind, especially not on nights like this, when the cold seeped into your bones and the rain refused to relent. You'd been walking since dawn, trudging across open fields and through sparse forests, driven by a singular desire to find shelter, a place with firelight, food, and the promise of rest, however fleeting. Pausing, you strained to listen. Beyond the patter of rain and the mournful howl of the wind rattling the thatched roofs, another sound broke through. Something distinct, alive. Laughter. A burst of it, raw and unbridled, followed by the faint strum of a lute, the murmur of voices calling to one another, and the clink of tankards in a familiar, comforting rhythm. Your heart stirred, not just from the chill, but from the sudden realization that you were close to refuge. Following the narrow, sludge-filled path, you spotted a faint glow spilling from a crooked building ahead. It was a medieval tavern. No sign, no proper name, just a weathered wooden board swinging precariously, its faded carving depicting either a warped barrel or perhaps a bear, indistinguishable in the gloom. The steps leading to the door were slick with rainwater and spilled ale, a treacherous welcome. Your hand trembled as you grasped the cold, rusted iron ring on the door. With a push, the heavy oak groaned open, its hinges protesting like the sigh of an ancient spirit. A wave of warmth hit you, thick with the sense of wood smoke, fermented ale, and something else, something vital, human, alive. You stepped into another world. Inside, the tavern buzzed like a hive, chaotic yet strangely harmonious. The light came from candles, some wedged into cracked glass bottles, others hastily stuck to the pitted stone walls, casting a dim, wavering glow. Shadows danced across the room, twisting into eerie shapes that seemed to writhe and flicker with a life of their own. The floor, packed earth strewn with damp straw, reeked of fermented hay, sweat, and spilled drink. A pungent, earthy smell that was oddly comforting in its raw honesty. There was no order to the furniture. Tables of every size and shape, some low and squat, others tall and wobbly, crowded the space, shoved together as if flung there in a drunken rage. The benches, warped and creaking, groaned under the weight of their occupants, each shift or stand eliciting a plaintive squeak. You moved carefully, sidestepping puddles of water and shards of broken pottery, weaving past a group of men roaring with laughter over a game of dice. The air was thick with the sour tang of old ale, the savory aroma of roasting meat, and the damp mustiness of the stone walls. A sensory assault that jolted your weary senses awake. Near the massive hearth, you found a small space on a battered bench, its wood chipped and worn smooth by countless travelers. Before you, the fire crackled, wet logs hissing and popping as they struggled to burn, sending tendrils of white smoke curling lazily through the room. The warmth was immediate, seeping into your sodden clothes and easing the ache in your limbs. You sank onto the bench, your breath slowing, the biting cold of the outside world melting away. It was replaced by a heavy, almost tangible comfort, as if your body were being wrapped in a soft, invisible cocoon. This wasn't luxury, nor was it safety in any absolute sense. But here, in this grimy medieval tavern, it was paradise. Around you, the pulse of medieval life thrummed in its own chaotic rhythm. A farmer with a bushy beard, his face flushed from too much ale, waved his arms wildly as he recounted a tale of capturing a boar as big as a horse. A minstrel, slumped against the wall, plucked at a battered lute missing half its strings, his voice hoarse but determined as he sang over the din. By the hearth, an old woman ladled pottage, a thick stew of boiled roots and old bones, into rough clay bowls, her hands steady despite the chaos. Every so often, a mangy yellow dog, its fur patchy and matted, slunk between the tables sniffing for scraps of bread. No one bothered to shoo it away. Your eyes wandered, soaking in the scene, memorizing every face, every gesture. These people didn't live slowly. They lived fiercely, explosively, as if each tankard of ale held a lifetime, each story a grand adventure. The tavern was a microcosm of their world, a place where the weight of survival was momentarily lifted, replaced by the fleeting joy of shared warmth and camaraderie. A man beside you, clad in a stained leather jerkin, turned your way. His breath was heavy with the scent of ale as he raised his tankard, his voice nasal but warm. "Traveler," he said, "forget the wind and rain tonight. Here, there's only fire, drink, and dreams." You smiled, clinking your tankard against his. He was right. In this moment, surrounded by flickering candlelight and the clumsy strumming of the lute, amid the raucous laughter and the soft snores of those dozing by the fire, you were no longer a stranger. You were part of this tavern, part of its fleeting, vibrant history. A history that felt mundane yet profound, like a lullaby whispered through the ages. The night deepened. Outside, the wind howled, flinging rain against the small window covered with stretched animal hide. But inside the tavern, no one cared. Tankards were filled and emptied, stories of old battles and new loves, woven with equal parts fervor and nostalgia. You leaned back against the rough stone wall, your cloak now mostly dry thanks to the fire's steady heat. Your eyelids grew heavy, lulled by the halting notes of the lute and the murmur of voices. It was as if the stories themselves were drawing you into a deeper, older sleep, one more restful than any you'd known in the clamor of modern cities. In that half-dream, the laughter faded to a distant hum, the fire's crackle became a cheerful song, and the wind's wail through the wooden door softened into a gentle melody. It was a lullaby born of countless nights like this, nights that carried no fear of tomorrow. Because here, in this medieval tavern, tonight was all that mattered. expanded reflection. The tavern, in its gritty imperfection, was more than a shelter. It was a sanctuary of human connection. In a world where survival demanded constant vigilance, where the cold and the dark were ever-present threats, places like this offered a rare respite. The people here weren't just drinking or storytelling. They were defying the harshness of their reality, carving out moments of joy and meaning in the face of uncertainty. This scene, frozen in time, reflects a universal truth: humanity's ability to find warmth in the coldest of moments. The medieval tavern, with its smoke and noise, its laughter and imperfections, mirrors the taverns, pubs, and gathering places of every era. It's a reminder that even in the hardest times, we seek each other out, sharing stories and dreams to make sense of the world. As you drifted deeper into sleep, the boundaries between past and present blurred. The tavern became a bridge across centuries, its firelight a beacon for all who seek refuge, not just from the rain, but from the weight of existence itself. In its walls, you found not just rest, but a fleeting sense of belonging, a moment where the world felt whole. Inside the tavern, where every story begins, no invitation was needed. You were already part of the tavern's heartbeat. The heavy wooden door thudded shut behind you, its groan a quiet punctuation mark that severed the cold, relentless world outside. In the smoky, warm embrace of the tavern, your worries, the dwindling coins in your purse, the ceaseless rain, the long road ahead, faded like a half-remembered dream, dissolving into the haze of firelight and human voices. You sat still, your breath syncing with the rhythm of the room. Slowly, almost instinctively, your eyes began to pick out the small details, the fragments of medieval life unfolding in every corner of the tavern, each one a story waiting to be heard. Near the roaring hearth, a cluster of merchants huddled around a scarred table. Their thick woolen tunics and threadbare goatskin cloaks spoke of hard-won prosperity, though the edges were frayed from countless journeys. They laughed loudly, clapping each other on the back, their voices rising as they traded tales of distant travels, bustling market fairs in far-off cities, ships groaning under cargoes of silk, wine, and pungent spices from the east. Each story sparked like an ember in the minds of those listening. Tales of strange lands, raging sea storms, and white-walled fortresses gleaming under a blistering sun. If you closed your eyes, you could almost feel the salt-laden wind of the sea stinging your cheeks, hear the creak of a ship's timbers beneath your feet. At another table, a group of mercenaries sat in brooding silence, nursing tankards of thick, dark ale. Their weathered faces, tanned and lined, bore the weight of too many battles. Their armor was patched and dented, their swords dull and carelessly propped against the table's edge. Their eyes, sunken and wary, hinted at stories they'd rather not share. Yet, under the flickering firelight, a rare smile would break through, a fleeting crack in their stoic masks, as one of them muttered a half-finished tale of a winter campaign on the borderlands, where the cold bit deeper than any blade and wolves howled through the endless nights. In a shadowed corner near the stone wall, where the candlelight cast trembling patterns, a wiry minstrel perched with a battered lyre. His hair was a tangled mess, his clothes patched and faded, but his fingers danced over the instrument's remaining strings with a quiet reverence. He sang of doomed romances, comical misadventures, princesses locked in towering keeps, and bumbling knights stumbling toward glory. His voice wasn't polished, but it was raw and honest, each note carrying the weight of shared dreams. The music wove through the clamor of the tavern, past the bursts of laughter, the clatter of bowls, and the steady breathing of those who'd already succumbed to the ale's embrace. The tavern was a world unto itself, a microcosm of medieval life. Here, time didn't flow as it did in the fields, or tick by the tolling of church bells. It moved to the cadence of stories. Each laugh, each shouted tale, each tankard filled and drained, served as a crude clock, measuring time in moments of human connection. You watched calloused hands pass heavy copper coins across tables, heard the cold clink of silver in hurried transactions. You caught the glint of suspicion in eyes during dice games, the quick, secretive winks that sealed clumsy bets. No one here was truly wealthy, but no one was too poor to have a story to tell. Even the children, barefoot and smudged with dirt, were part of the tavern's pulse. A boy, no older than 8, with matted brown hair and mischievous eyes, darted between tables, snatching a crust of stale bread from an unguarded plate. The table erupted in laughter. No one scolded him. A serving girl in a faded gray dress, her hands rough from work, flashed a knowing smile as she poured ale for a patron, then slipped the boy a crumbling piece of cheese when no one was looking. Life in the medieval world was harsh, defined by scarcity and struggle. But on nights like this, inside a tavern thick with the smells of sweat, smoke, and ale, there was something that felt achingly close to what later generations might call happiness. You shifted slightly, pulling your damp cloak tighter around your shoulders. Your back pressed against the cold, damp stone wall, its chill seeping through the cracks of the ancient building. Yet the warmth of the hearth, the low hum of voices, and the clinking of bowls and tankards built a soft barrier against the icy world outside. This was where history, the kind that might seem mundane or boring in the retelling, came alive, its ordinary moments pulsing with a stubborn, vibrant energy. An old man with a long, tangled beard, hunched in a corner, suddenly spoke up, his voice cutting through the din. "Long ago," he began, "I met a witch in the eastern woods." His eyes gleamed with the fire's reflection, and one by one, without prompting, the tavern's patrons turned to listen. Even the minstrel paused, his fingers still on the lyre, holding his breath. You did the same. In the dim glow of the candles, amid the crackle of the fire and the heavy scent of ale, the old man's story took flight, light as smoke. He spoke of a wanderer lost in a forest so deep the trees seemed to whisper his name in the wind. He told of a witch in a green cloak, her eyes like twin emeralds, who offered the wanderer a single wish, but at a cost he could never repay. The story unfurled, drifting through the room, settling like a gentle mist over those slumped at tables, half asleep and half dreaming. It wove itself into the fabric of the tavern, joining the countless tales that had been told here before. You closed your eyes, letting the old man's voice, the halting strum of the lyre, and the faint whistle of the wind through the door blend into a bittersweet symphony. It was a lullaby that carried you toward a world where the lines between dream and reality blurred, where the tavern became more than a shelter. It became a fleeting home for wandering dreams and stories without endings. The night stretched on, the stories continued, unhurried, unfolding at their own pace, and you remained there, seated among the flow of a world long gone yet never truly lost. It lived on in every tale, every dream, every deep, restful sleep beneath the low, smoke-stained roof of the tavern, a deeper reflection. The tavern was more than a refuge from the rain. It was a crucible for human connection. In a medieval world defined by toil and uncertainty, where every day was a battle against hunger, cold, or worse, places like this were sacred. The people here weren't just sharing ale or stories. They were weaving a tapestry of resilience, stitching together moments of joy to shield against the darkness outside. This scene captures a timeless truth. Humanity's need to gather, to tell stories, to find meaning in the mundane. The tavern, with its rough-hewn tables and smoky air, is a mirror to every gathering place across history. Inns, pubs, marketplaces, or even the digital forums of today. It's a reminder that stories are the currency of survival, traded as freely as coins, binding strangers into a fleeting community. As you lingered in the tavern's embrace, the weight of your own journey, the road behind and the uncertainty ahead, seemed to lift. The stories, the laughter, the clink of tankards, all wove you into the moment, making you forget, if only for a night, who you were or where you were going. The tavern became a timeless space, its firelight a beacon for all who seek not just shelter, but a sense of belonging. The medieval world, with its hardships and fleeting joys, wasn't so different from our own. Its people, like us, sought warmth, connection, and stories to make sense of their lives. In the tavern's glow, you glimpsed the enduring spark of humanity, a spark that burns through centuries, carried in every tale told, every song sung, every quiet moment shared in the flicker of a fire. The tavern keeper, the silent guardian of chaos. Amid the raucous, smoke-filled chaos of the tavern, saturated with the sharp tang of ale and the clamor of voices, one figure stood out as the anchor holding this small, vibrant world together, the tavern keeper. He stood behind a rough-hewn counter, little more than a thick plank propped across two weathered ale barrels. His calloused hands clutching a tattered rag that he used to wipe a tankard that never quite seemed to get clean. Every so often, he'd nod curtly to a regular, flash a wry smirk when a drunken patron toppled from their bench, or shoot a piercing glance to quell a brewing argument before it could erupt. He didn't need to shout or wave his arms to command the room. His authority was in his silence, a quiet power that radiated through the haze of firelight and human noise. The tavern keeper needed no introduction. Everyone knew his name, though it was rarely spoken. No sign hung above the door, no crest adorned his worn tunic. In the medieval world, where titles and roles defined a person's place, the most vital figure in any small town wasn't the lord in his distant manor or even the priest in the stone church. It was the tavern keeper. This tavern, with its low ceiling and flickering hearth, was the beating heart of the community. It was where rumors were born, whispered over tankards and carried out into the night. It was where deals were struck, sealed with trembling handshakes and guarded smiles. It was where the drunk and the sober, the weary and the joyful, coexisted under the wavering glow of the fire. And to keep this fragile pulse alive, it took more than someone who could pour ale. It took someone who could read a man's intentions in the flick of an eye, someone who knew when to offer a grin and when to slam a fist on the counter. You watched the tavern keeper in quiet fascination. A nearby candle cast its light across his face, revealing a lean, sun-weathered visage framed by a scruffy beard. His eyes, narrow as slits in an old shutter, gleamed with a sharpness that no one could ignore. A silent intelligence honed by countless winters and endless nights like this one. Those eyes missed nothing, catching every raised voice, every subtle shift in the room's mood. A stumbling minstrel, his tattered cloak swaying, staggered toward the counter, slurring a demand for more ale. The tavern keeper didn't speak. He simply shook his head, a single, deliberate motion. The minstrel scratched his head, muttered something incoherent, and shuffled back to his corner, where he promptly collapsed into a snoring heap. No argument, no commotion, just a shake of the head, and the matter was settled, as if a gust of wind had swept the tension away. Behind the counter, barrels of ale sat half-submerged in muddy water to keep them cool. On a sagging shelf, clay jars held honey, a few precious pinches of salt, and bundles of dried herbs. Less noticeable were the items that hinted at the tavern keeper's unspoken authority. A ring of rusted keys, a coil of rope, and, partly hidden behind a torn curtain, a heavy wooden staff tipped with iron. No one dared ask about the staff, but its presence was a quiet promise. If chaos truly broke out, that staff would speak louder than any words. In the unpredictable world of the Middle Ages, order wasn't always enforced by judges or soldiers. Sometimes it came from men like the tavern keeper, wielding nothing more than a stern look and a well-placed staff. You realized, sitting there in the flickering light, that under this low, sagging roof, the tavern keeper was the guardian of a delicate balance. He was a barkeep, an unnamed judge, a sleepless watchman. His presence held the tavern together, keeping it from spiraling into the kind of disorder that could shatter its fragile warmth. Beside the counter, a young woman, perhaps his daughter or a hired hand, moved with practiced ease, gathering broken tankards and sweeping up scraps of food. She glided through the crowd without brushing against a single shoulder, never spilling a drop, as if she knew every crack and corner of the room by heart. You guessed she'd grown up here, raised in the rhythm of this tavern, or the mundane pulse of medieval life, what some might call boring history for sleep, played out day after day. She was as much a part of the tavern as the stone walls, the crackling hearth, or the stories that hung in the smoky air like threads of a tapestry. Her quick, quiet movements mirrored the tavern keeper's own understated control, a silent partnership that kept the chaos at bay. The sounds of the tavern, laughter, shouted tales, the slap of hands on shoulders, the calls for more ale, wove a vibrant backdrop. But beneath it all, you sensed a quieter current, a subtle rhythm orchestrated by the tavern keeper. Every nod, every furrowed brow, every slow shake of his head was a conductor's gesture, guiding the unruly symphony of villagers, merchants, soldiers, minstrels, and weary travelers. You leaned back against the damp stone wall, exhaling a long, slow breath. The firelight danced across the room, its glow catching on wisps of smoke that curled lazily upward. The murmur of stories filled your ears, their words indistinct, but their cadence soothing. In this world, there was no need for worry. All you had to do was sit, listen, and let yourself sink into the moment. The tavern's stories washed over you like a gentle tide. Someone spun a tale of a hunter tricked into a haunted castle, his footsteps echoing through empty halls. Another group traded riddles about the monsters said to lurk in the forest beyond the village. A man's booming laugh rang out as he recounted a humiliating tumble in the crowded market square. Each story, each burst of laughter, each rough but warm clap on the back, was noted by the tavern keeper's silent gaze. You understood then that he wasn't just keeping the ale flowing or the fire burning. He was keeping the soul of the tavern alive. A sudden gust of wind howled through the cracks in the door, rattling the animal hide window. Outside, the rain pounded the thatched roof, and the wind wailed in long, mournful cries. The world beyond was dark and unforgiving, a place of cold and uncertainty. But inside, the fire leaped higher. Tankards clinked, and stories wove a warm blanket around everyone in the room. The tavern keeper lifted his head, his eyes sweeping the space. It was a brief, almost invisible glance, but it carried everything: vigilance, protection, acceptance. No matter who you were, a weary traveler, a jaded mercenary, a cunning merchant, or a ragged minstrel, tonight, under this roof, you belonged. The tavern keeper's gaze made that clear, a silent promise that this was a place for all. And so it was. In the wild, harsh world of the Middle Ages, where survival was a daily gamble, you didn't always need epic deeds, towering castles, or battles for thrones. Sometimes all it took was a smoky tavern, a warm tankard of ale, a half-true story, and a tavern keeper who guarded it all in silence. This was the world of boring history for sleep, a world that seemed ordinary but was anything but. It was a place where dreams were sheltered, sleep was cradled, and the hearts of travelers were warmed by the glow of a fire and the weight of shared stories. A deeper reflection. The tavern keeper was more than a man behind a counter. He was a steward of human connection. In a medieval society where life was defined by scarcity, danger, and the relentless march of seasons, the tavern was a rare sanctuary. It was a place where the weight of the world could be set aside, if only for a night, and the tavern keeper was its silent architect. His role went beyond serving ale or settling disputes. He was a keeper of stories, a witness to the lives that passed through his doors. Every laugh, every whispered secret, every drunken confession was part of the tavern's history, and he was its chronicler, storing it all in the lines of his weathered face and the glint of his watchful eyes. This scene speaks to a universal truth: the need for places where people can gather, share, and feel seen. The medieval tavern, with its rough edges and smoky air, is a predecessor to the pubs, cafes, and community spaces of later eras. It's a reminder that even in the hardest times, humanity seeks out connection, finding solace in the act of storytelling and the warmth of shared presence. As you sat there, lulled by the fire's crackle and the hum of voices, you felt the tavern's magic. It wasn't just a shelter from the storm, it was a refuge for the soul. The tavern keeper, with his quiet authority, ensured that this refuge endured, night after night, for every weary soul who crossed his threshold. In the flicker of the firelight, you glimpsed the timelessness of this place. The stories told here would outlive the tellers, carried forward in the memories of those who listened. The tavern keeper, in his silent vigilance, was not just guarding a room. He was guarding a legacy, a fragile but enduring thread of human resilience that stretched across centuries. The tankard, the smile, and the whispered secrets. As the night outside thickened into a darkness so dense it seemed you could claw at it with your hands, the world inside the medieval tavern softened into a long, tender moment, suspended in time. Every soul in the room, from the drowsy minstrel half-heartedly plucking his battered lyre to the silver-bearded old man sipping his ale with deliberate slowness, seemed to sway to a silent rhythm. It was a cadence you could only feel by sitting still, listening deeply, and letting yourself drift into the current of the tavern's heartbeat. You lifted your tankard. The rough clay was warm from the serving girl's hands, its surface still carrying the faint heat of her touch. The aroma hit you first, a heady mix of honey, malted barley, and the sharp, sour bite of fermentation. It was an earthy, unrefined scent, unpolished by the refinements of later centuries, yet rich with the raw essence of the land. You brought the tankard to your lips and took a small sip. It wasn't cold like modern beer or smooth like fine wine. The ale was thick, cloudy, slightly sour, and faintly bitter, but it left a delicate sweetness lingering on your tongue, like the echo of a story half told. That single sip warmed more than your stomach. It pulled you deeper into the tavern's quiet, enveloping circle. Nearby, an elderly couple sat close, their voices barely above a whisper. The old man, his sparse white hair catching the firelight, rested a trembling hand on his wife's frail fingers. They didn't need to speak loudly. In this tavern, no one did. The stories that mattered, the ones with weight, floated through the air like the smoke from the hearth, curling around the wobbly tables, the creaking benches, and the patrons dozing over bowls of cold pottage. You tuned your ears to the fragments of medieval life drifting around you. A soldier, his voice low and gravelly, spoke of his first glimpse of Jerusalem's golden walls, so far from this muddy village. A young woman, her cheeks flushed, giggled softly as she showed off a silver ring gifted by the blacksmith from the next hamlet. A merchant, his belly shaking with laughter, recounted a clever swindle pulled on a band of northern traders. None of the stories were complete. None were polished or neatly resolved. They broke apart into shimmering fragments, glinting in the firelight, brushing against each other like dusty pieces of stained glass from a forgotten world. You leaned back in your chair, the wood creaking under your weight. A faint draft slipped through a crack in the door, carrying the damp scent of earth, rotting straw, and faintly the wild musk of distant forest. The rain outside had softened from a relentless downpour to a gentle patter, like fingertips tapping on moss-covered stones. In that moment, you felt it more clearly than ever. The medieval world wasn't just about wars and kings. It was about nights like this, nights when people gathered around a steaming bowl of stew, a cloudy tankard of ale, a shared glance, a fleeting smile, and secrets that only surfaced in the glow of firelight and the haze of drink. A stranger approached the counter, a man in a dark brown cloak, his boots caked with mud. The tavern keeper said nothing, merely nodded and poured a full tankard of ale. The man settled at a table near you, the dim candlelight revealing a face carved by hardship, angular, weathered by sun and wind, with deep-set eyes that shimmered with a mix of wariness and exhaustion. He didn't drink right away. Instead, he turned the tankard slowly in his hands, staring into the fire as if it held answers. After a long pause, he murmured, almost to himself, "Out west, on the stone hills, I saw something no one would believe." No one responded. No one needed to. In this tavern, not every story demanded an answer. Sometimes it was enough just to speak, to let the words drift into the smoky air and settle among the listeners. Moments later, a group of young men, their faces flushed from ale, erupted in laughter as one of them slipped from his bench and sprawled on the straw-strewn floor. The sound rippled through the room like a gentle wave, sparking claps on shoulders, shouted jests, and the clink of tankards raised in camaraderie. You found yourself smiling, caught up in the current of it all, the boring history for sleep that came alive in every chuckle, every knowing glance, every sip of ale that warmed the soul. Across the room, the minstrel, perhaps roused from a brief drunken nap, began to sing again. There were no words this time, just a soft, wordless hum, the notes clumsy but earnest, floating through the smoke-heavy air. The song had no clear beginning or end. It was like the breath of the tavern itself, slow and steady, lulling you into a rhythm far removed from the hurried pace of the world outside. You lifted your tankard again, taking another sip. The warmth spread through your chest, radiating to your fingertips and toes, which had been numb from a day spent slogging through mud. You thought to yourself, "This isn't a place for heroes. It's not where grand histories are forged, but it's where the stories that lull us to sleep endure, where sighs, awkward promises, and quiet dreams are preserved, like the last log smoldering in a winter hearth." A sudden knock at the door broke the spell. No one rushed to answer. In a medieval tavern, late-night visitors didn't always bring good tidings. The tavern keeper's eyes swept the room, his hand resting lightly on the counter, fingers brushing the edge of the heavy staff hidden behind the curtain. After a moment of stillness, one of the younger lads, his steps cautious, approached the door. He cracked it open, and a gust of cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and wet earth. An old woman stood outside, her silver hair plastered to her face, her cloak soaked and dripping. In her trembling hands she clutched a bundle of sodden herbs. No questions were asked. A chair was pulled close to the hearth. A tankard of ale was set before her. An old cloak, worn but dry, was draped over her shoulders. It was that simple. On nights like this, every traveler needed a refuge, even if it was just a crooked tavern reeking of ale and smoke. And so the night rolled on. Another tankard. Another story. Another sleepy smile. Under this low, sagging roof, secrets were whispered, dreams were shared in fleeting glances, sorrows were softened by laughter, by the wind's faint howl, by the cloudy ale that warmed the heart. You tilted your head back, your eyelids growing heavy. Outside, the world was cold and lonely. But here, medieval life unfolded in its smallest, most human details. A tankard, a touch on the shoulder, a murmured greeting. And in the haze of those whispered secrets, you slipped into sleep. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, not entirely, but it was one cradled by laughter, warmed by the fire, and woven with stories that would never fade. A deeper reflection. The tavern was a sanctuary, not just from the rain but from the isolation of the medieval world. In an era where survival demanded constant effort, where famine, disease, and violence were ever-present threats, places like this offered a rare moment of reprieve. The ale, the stories, the shared warmth weren't just comforts. They were acts of defiance against a world that could be relentlessly cruel. This scene captures something timeless. The human need to connect, to find meaning in the ordinary. The tankard of ale, rough and unrefined, was more than a drink. It was a vessel for shared experience, a reminder that even in hardship, there was room for joy. The stories, fragmented and incomplete, were the threads that bound the tavern's patrons together, creating a fleeting community out of strangers. As you drifted towards sleep, you felt the tavern's deeper truth. It wasn't about grand gestures or epic tales. It was about the small human moments, the whispered secrets, the clumsy songs, the quiet acts of kindness that gave life its weight. The medieval tavern, with its smoke and laughter, was a microcosm of resilience, a place where the boring history of everyday life became a tapestry of enduring beauty. This world, long gone, lives on in the echoes of those nights. The stories told here, the dreams shared in the flicker of firelight, are part of a legacy that stretches across centuries. In every gathering place, from medieval taverns to modern cafes, we carry forward the same impulse: to sit together, to share, to find warmth in the coldest of times. The medieval meal, the breath of the hearth. If ale was the soul of the medieval tavern, then food was its quiet, steady breath. It wasn't the lavish feasts of noble banquets, with tables groaning under platters of roasted boar and delicate pastries dripping with honey. Nor was it the overflowing dishes of meat and sugared confections depicted in romanticized paintings of the Middle Ages. Here, in the smoky heart of the tavern, food was survival, sustenance that carried people through endless days of rain, bone-chilling winters, and journeys with no promised end. You sat at the worn wooden table, the warmth from the nearby hearth caressing your cold, stiff hands. Before you stood a rough clay bowl, its surface pitted and uneven, filled with a steaming, thick concoction known as pottage, the lifeblood of the medieval poor. Beside the bowl lay a wooden spoon, its handle smoothed to a sheen by countless hands. There was no tablecloth, no gleaming cutlery, only the bare essentials: a bowl, a spoon, and the promise of warmth to fend off the hunger that gnawed like a stray dog at the edge of every medieval life. You picked up the spoon and gave the pottage a gentle stir. From beneath a thin layer of foam, a pungent aroma rose: sharp onions, wilted greens, and the faint, smoky trace of cured meat. The scents blended into a damp, comforting harmony, a fragrance so distinctly medieval it seemed to carry the weight of centuries. In the tavern's dim, flickering light, you studied the contents of the bowl. Small, misshapen carrots, their pale yellow hue barely visible. Chunks of turnip, soft and crumbling. A few sprigs of what might have been thyme, tossed in haphazardly. And floating among them, clumps of half-cooked barley and oats, their grains still tough and chewy. It wasn't a feast for the eyes, but in a world where hunger lurked just beyond the door, this simple, steaming bowl of pottage was nothing short of a miracle. You scooped up a small spoonful and brought it to your lips. The first taste slid across your tongue, warm, slightly bland, with a hint of sourness. Yet it was strangely satisfying, its unpretentious flavor filling your mouth with a raw, honest fullness. It wasn't gourmet, it didn't pretend to be, but the way the warmth spread through your chest, settling in your empty stomach, made you forget the rain hammering outside, the sodden boots clinging to your feet, and the raw blisters burning at your heels. This was the essence of boring history for sleep, not the thunder of battle drums or the clash of swords, but the quiet rhythm of survival, measured in slow sips of soup and the soft hum of existence. Beside you, a middle-aged woman with neatly tied hair and a freckled face hunched over her own bowl of pottage. Each spoonful was deliberate, efficient, though a few drops spilled onto the table. She didn't seem to notice or care. She ate with the practiced ease of someone long accustomed to scarcity, quickly, silently, accepting what was given without complaint. To her, and for everyone in the tavern, a meal wasn't about pleasure. It was about endurance. On rare occasions, luck brought a little more to the table. A knuckle of meat, perhaps from a scrawny rabbit or a wild bird, might have been simmered in the pottage pot since the day before. If the hunters or fishermen had a good day, the tavern might offer slivers of smoked fish or a few spicy sausages, their blackened casings dangling above the hearth like humble trophies. But most days, the food remained as simple and unadorned as the lives of those who ate it. Beyond the pottage, The table sometimes held a loaf of dark bread, dense and heavy, baked from rye or barley. Left too long, it turned hard as stone. You reached for a small piece, your fingers brushing its rough crust. Breaking off a chunk, you found the exterior brittle, like fired clay, while the inside was coarse and chewy, infused with the faint smokiness of the oven's ash. You dipped the bread into the pottage, letting it soak up the broth until it softened. Bringing it to your mouth, you chewed slowly. The flavor was a medley of charred grain, faint ash, and the sharp tang of onions, layered with the subtle sweetness of the broth-soaked bread. It was more than food. It was a taste of time itself, of long, relentless days etched into every crumb. Near the hearth, a group of hunters, fresh from the forest, gathered around a large wooden platter. On it lay a few charred pieces of rabbit, the edges blackened from the fire. They passed the meager portions among themselves, tearing off bites and chewing greedily, their laughter and tales of the hunt filling the air. One man paused, closing his eyes and inhaling deeply, as if the smoky aroma of the meat alone could sate his hunger. In another corner, an elderly woman carefully wrapped a handful of dried apples in a tattered cloth. Fruit was a luxury, rare and precious. These withered slices, hung to dry since the autumn harvest, were remnants of warmer days, their faint sweetness a whisper of sunlight in the depths of winter's chill. Each bite she saved was a small act of defiance against the season's hardships. You smiled to yourself. Amid the tavern's seeming chaos, there was a quiet beauty in these everyday moments. The medieval world, so often reduced to tales of knights and castles, revealed its true heart here, in the clink of spoons, the scent of simmering pottage, and the shared warmth of a meal. The act of eating was a ritual of connection. It wasn't about grand gestures or poetic declarations, but about the simple, profound act of sharing. A bowl of pottage passed from one hand to another, a crust of bread broken in half, a fleeting glance of understanding between strangers. These were the threads that wove the tavern's patrons into a fragile, temporary community. You ate slowly, savoring each spoonful, each bite of bread. Every taste was a breath, every swallow a heartbeat. In the tavern's gentle din, the crackle of the fire, the murmur of voices, the occasional burst of laughter, you felt your solitude dissolve. You were no longer just a weary traveler, a lone figure trudging through the rain. You were a small but vital part of this quiet, enduring current, a single brushstroke in the vast, overlooked canvas of history. Outside, the rain continued its steady fall, drumming softly on the thatched roof. Inside, the hearth glowed, its flames casting shadows that danced across the walls. The smells of pottage, bread, and wood smoke mingled, wrapping the room in a comforting haze. You leaned back, your eyes growing heavy. The untold stories of the tavern drifted around you, their words indistinct, but their rhythm soothing. The patter of rain on the roof blended with the fire's soft crackle, forming a gentle lullaby that tugged at your consciousness. This was the sweetest kind of boring history for sleep. A steaming bowl of pottage, a dry crust of bread, and a long, quiet night unfolding beneath a roof heavy with smoke and human presence. The meal in the tavern was more than sustenance. It was a testament to resilience. In the medieval world, where survival was a daily struggle against hunger, cold, and uncertainty, food carried a weight beyond its physical nourishment. Each bowl of pottage, each hard-won piece of bread was a victory over the elements, a quiet rebellion against the specter of want. This scene reveals a universal truth, the power of shared rituals to bind people together. The pottage, humble and unassuming, was a bridge between strangers, a reminder that even in the leanest times there was enough to share. The act of eating together, of passing a bowl or breaking bread, was a language of its own, speaking of trust, generosity, and the unspoken bonds that form in the glow of a fire. As you sat there, warmed by the meal on the tavern's embrace, you glimpsed the deeper pulse of the medieval world. It wasn't found in the clash of armies or the decrees of kings, but in the small, human moments that history often overlooks: the clink of a spoon, the scent of simmering broth, the quiet satisfaction of a full stomach. These were the threads that held communities together, weaving a tapestry of endurance that stretched across generations. The tavern, with its rough tables and smoky air, was a microcosm of this resilience. It was a place where the ordinary became extraordinary, where a simple meal became a celebration of life itself. As you drifted toward sleep, you felt the weight of those countless nights, each one a quiet triumph of human connection, carried forward in the stories, the laughter, and the warmth of a shared hearth. As the last spoonsful of pottage were scraped from clay bowls and the empty vessels lay scattered across the tables, the medieval tavern didn't settle into the quiet hush you might have expected. Instead, it stirred to life in a new way, its pulse quickening with the clatter of dice, the shuffle of cards, and the murmured thrill of games of chance. In the dim, wavering glow of candles jammed into rough wooden holders, groups of patrons drew their chairs closer, their voices dropping to conspiratorial whispers. Silver coins glinted faintly, bone dice rattled in cupped hands, and worn, hand-painted cards emerged from pockets and pouches. There were no formal rules, no referee to enforce order, only the fragile line between fortune and ruin, hanging in the air like the tavern's smoky haze, thick with the scents of sweat, ale, and burning wood. You sat quietly, your half-empty tankard cradled in your hands, watching the scene unfold like a silent performance, a captivating act in the ongoing play of boring history for sleep. The games were more than mere entertainment. They were a ritual, a way to wrestle with the unpredictability of a world that offered little certainty. At a table across the room, a burly man with a shaved head and a tangled beard shook a handful of dice in his massive palm. Each shake produced a dry, rasping sound, like sand slipping through an hourglass. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the small bone cubes tumbling across the table. They bounced, spun, and settled, their crudely carved faces catching the candlelight. A roar of laughter erupted. Someone had won, someone had lost. A wooden mug of ale was shoved toward the victor, while the loser received a playful punch to the shoulder. There was no bitterness, no grudges, only sleepy chuckles and the clink of mugs raised in good-natured camaraderie. The game moved on, the dice rattling again, the cycle of hope and defeat spinning endlessly under the tavern's low ceiling. Your gaze drifted to another table near the hearth, where a card game was in full swing. The deck was tattered, its small wooden cards stained and faded, the black ink of their hand-drawn symbols, swords, cups, staves, and coins, barely legible. The dealer, a lanky young man in a patched wool tunic, handled the cards with the nimble grace of an amateur magician. Each card hit the table with a soft thud like a whispered secret. Every glance, every quirk of a lip, every subtle nod was part of the game. A dance of stakes that went beyond coins to include pride, reputation, and unspoken confidences. In the medieval world where the poor had little to call their own, luck was a currency as valuable as silver. On nights like this, it became a quiet religion, practiced not with solemn prayers or grand ceremonies, but with the roll of dice, the turn of a card, and the silent acceptance of whatever fate decreed. You caught snippets of conversation between two players, their voices low and intense. 5 coppers on this round. Done. If I lose, I've got my old boots to wager next. You smiled to yourself, realizing that in this tavern anything could be staked: boots, belts, cloaks, even the rusted knife dangling from a belt. Value wasn't fixed here, it was fluid, defined by need. What mattered to one man was treasure to another, and in the flickering candlelight, every possession held the potential to change hands. A sudden burst of laughter from the corner of the room drew your attention. A young man, his face flushed from too much ale, had just lost 3 games in a row. Staggering to his feet, he dramatically yanked off his threadbare coat and tossed it onto the table as his next bet. The room exploded with cheers, whistles, and rhythmic clapping. The tavern keeper, watching from behind his counter, shook his head with a faint, amused smirk, but made no move to intervene. Games like these were as much a part of the tavern as the pottage or the fire's warmth, a vital thread in its tapestry. Your eyes wandered to another contest, simpler but no less intense. An arm wrestling match. Two men sat across from each other, their broad hands locked in a fierce grip. Muscles strained, faces reddened, and veins bulged as they pushed against one another. The crowd around them hooted and hollered, coins changing hands as bets were placed on the outcome. The air crackled with energy, the spectators' shouts blending with the crackle of the hearth. With a final groan, one man's arm gave way, slamming into the table and knocking over a bench. The room erupted in laughter, cheers, and good-natured curses. The loser rubbed his wrist, grinning despite his defeat, while the winner raised his arms in mock triumph, soaking in the applause. Then, like a wave receding, the excitement ebbed, and the patrons drifted back to their seats, ready for the next game, the next roll of the dice. You turned your gaze to the small window, where raindrops tapped relentlessly against the stretched animal hide. Beyond the tavern's walls, the night was cold, wet, and desolate. But inside, these strangers, bound by their simple games, wove an invisible web of connection, a fragile, temporary kinship that warmed the room as surely as the hearth. The medieval world offered little room for grand hopes. Survival was a daily gamble, a roll of the dice against hunger, cold, and misfortune. Yet in moments like these, a winning hand, a boisterous wrestling match, a shared laugh in the dark, people found something to cling to. These were the small, fleeting victories that made the long nights bearable. You thought to yourself, this is the boring history for sleep that chronicles rarely capture. No heroes, no epic deeds, just ordinary people battling the winter's chill and empty stomachs with reckless games under the wavering glow of candles. It was a history written in the clatter of dice, the shuffle of cards, and the warmth of a laugh shared among strangers. You exhaled slowly, your breath visible in the cool air seeping through the cracks in the door. The tavern's warmth wrapped around you like a soft blanket, shielding you from the night's bite. The dice continued to rattle, the cards to whisper as they were dealt, and the laughter, curses, and weary groans blended into a steady, comforting hum, the soundtrack of the tavern's endless night. You closed your eyes just for a moment, letting yourself drift with the sleepy, enveloping rhythm. The games, the voices, the faint patter of rain, they wove together into a lullaby, pulling you deeper into the tavern's embrace. You weren't just a bystander anymore. You were part of this night, part of this quiet, resilient world. A deeper reflection. The games of chance in the tavern were more than diversions. They were a mirror to the medieval soul. In a world where so much was beyond control, where crops could fail, winters could kill, and fate could turn on a whim, these games offered a way to confront uncertainty head-on. Each roll of the dice, each card laid down, was a small act of defiance, a way to seize control, however fleeting, over the chaos of life. This scene captures a timeless human impulse, the need to find joy in the face of hardship. The tavern, with its rough tables and smoky air, was a stage for this impulse, a place where strangers became allies, if only for a night, through the shared thrill of risk and reward. The coins, the dice, the tattered cards weren't just objects. They were symbols of hope, of the belief that luck might smile, even on the humblest soul. As you lingered in the tavern's glow, you felt the weight of those countless nights, each one a quiet testament to human endurance. The games played here were echoes of games played across centuries, from medieval inns to modern gathering places, where people still wager, laugh, and connect in the face of an uncertain world. The tavern was a sanctuary, not just from the rain, but from the isolation of existence, and its games were the rituals that bound its patrons together. In the flicker of the candlelight, you glimpsed the deeper truth of this place. The stories told in dice rolls and card games were as vital as those spoken aloud, each one a thread in the tapestry of boring history that history books overlook. Yet it was this history of laughter, risk, and fleeting triumphs that carried the medieval world forward, night after night, through the cold and the dark. The storytellers of the long night. As the clatter of dice faded, the cards were tucked away, and the sleepy laughter softened, the medieval tavern slipped into a different rhythm, slower, deeper, more intimate. The night had reached its quiet heart, where the weight of ale softened tongues, weary hands stilled from games of chance, and hoarse voices turned to storytelling. You sat there, your hands wrapped around a rough clay tankard, its bottom coated with a thin film of ale. The warmth from the hearth brushed your cheeks while the steady patter of rain outside played like a distant drum, a backdrop to the tavern's unfolding drama. In the dim, flickering light of candles, the air grew heavy with anticipation, as if the room itself were waiting for the next voice to rise. A man stood up. He was no hero from a tapestry. His face was a map of small scars, his back slightly hunched, his patched cloak hanging loosely on his thin frame. Yet when he began to speak, the tavern fell silent, every eye turning toward him, every breath held. His voice was low and gravelly, laced with the faint bitterness of old ale. Long ago, he began, there was a knight. He had no horse, no sword, only a pair of tattered boots and a heart forged of brass. No one expected a perfect tale, no one demanded logic or a tidy, happy ending. What they craved was the steady cadence of his voice, a new pulse to carry them through the final hours of a long, exhausting day. The story unfolded, rough and unpolished, like a patchwork quilt stitched from memory and imagination. The knight, poor and unremarkable, wandered through distant lands, crossing paths with goblins, a cunning witch, and a princess transformed into an ancient oak. Each detail was a thread, weaving a soft, comforting layer over the darkness of the night. You felt your eyelids grow heavy, not because the tale was extraordinary, but because its rhythm was hypnotic, lulling, deliberate, like the weary footsteps of a traveler at day's end. When the man finished, there was no applause, only a few quiet nods, a hoarse chuckle from a shadowed corner, and a silent pat on the shoulder between friends. In the medieval world, storytellers were honored not with cheers, but with the gift of undivided attention, a currency more precious than coin. Next, a young woman stepped forward. Her dark brown cloak was frayed, her hair tied back with a simple hemp cord, but her eyes sparkled like twin flames in the candlelight. She settled onto the straw-strewn floor, gathering a handful of it as a makeshift cushion, and began to speak. "Tonight," she said, her voice soft as a breeze, "as the rain falls on the thatched roof, a wanderer slipped into the village, carrying a curse in their shadow." Her words drifted like dew, each one settling lightly before dissolving, leaving a cool, lingering sensation. She spoke of talking mice, doors that opened to other worlds, and curses that were not endings but gateways to strange adventures. Though your eyes burned with sleep, you couldn't tear yourself away from her tale. Her voice was a thread, pulling you deeper into the tavern's spell. In this rain-soaked night, the tavern was no longer just a shelter. It was a ship adrift on a vast, dark sea of shadow and sorrow. Each story was a gust of wind, each teller a sail, guiding the weary passengers through the long night. And you, a tired traveler, needed only to sit, to listen, to let yourself be carried. Others joined in, their voices rising like sparks from the hearth. An old man spun a tale of the biggest fish he'd ever hooked, long as a roof beam, strong as an ox, lost only because a rat had chewed through his line. A tailor boasted of a cloak he'd sewn for a noble, woven from spider silk and dyed with moonlight and cactus spines. A boy, barely 10, stammered through a story of battling imaginary goblins in the woods near the village, his eyes wide with earnestness. Every tale, no matter how clumsy or riddled with holes, was received with respect. In this tavern, truth was secondary to feeling. A story didn't need to be factual. It needed only to be shared, to scatter its seeds into the night, to take root in the hearts of those who listened. You glanced around, the candlelight softening the faces around you. They looked gentler now, like wax figures slowly melting in the warmth. Gone were the winners and losers of the dice games. The cheating merchant, the miserly old woman clutching her last coin. In their place were travelers, pausing for a night, offering the one thing they had left, their stories. And in that moment, you understood. This was the most beautiful kind of boring history for sleep. No wars, no conquests, just whispered tales and fragile dreams woven in the firelight. These stories, unrecorded in any chronicle, were the truest essence of the medieval world. The quiet, overlooked moments that bound people together, keeping them anchored through the cold and the dark. The night deepened. An old woman, her hair a wild nest of gray, began to sing. A soft, mournful lullaby in a northern tongue you didn't understand. The words were foreign, but their melody, low and haunting, was a universal language. It was enough to loosen the weight of your burdens, to let your shoulders sag, your breath slow. You leaned your head against the rough stone wall, your eyes half closed. The wind rattled the rafters, the firewood popped in the hearth, and the woman's song ebbed and flowed, like waves lapping at a shore. You hovered between two worlds, the steady drum of rain on the roof and the gentle murmur of stories, delicate as spider silk, tying you to this fleeting moment. In that space, you were no longer a stranger, a lone traveler passing through. You were part of the tavern, part of its stories, part of the dreams that drifted like smoke. You were part of this endless night, a single note in its quiet, enduring song, a deeper reflection. The storytellers of the tavern were more than entertainers. They were the keepers of a fragile, vital flame. In the medieval world, where life was a relentless cycle of labor, hunger, and uncertainty, stories were a refuge, a way to make sense of the chaos, to find meaning in the mundane. Each tale, no matter how fantastical or flawed, was a gift, a bridge between strangers, a reminder that even in the darkest nights there was light to be shared. This scene captures a timeless human need, to tell and to be heard. The tavern, with its smoky air and creaking benches, was a sanctuary for this need, a place where the ordinary became extraordinary through the act of storytelling. The knight with his brass heart, the cursed wanderer, the fish that got away, these weren't just stories, they were lifelines, tethering the listeners to hope, to laughter, to each other. As you lingered in the tavern's glow, you felt the weight of those countless nights, each one a quiet triumph of human connection. The stories told here were part of a legacy that stretched beyond the medieval world, echoing in the campfires, pubs, and gathering places of every era. They were the boring history that history books ignored, yet they were the heart of what it meant to be human. Finding solace in shared words, in the flicker of a fire, in the knowledge that no one was truly alone. The tavern was a vessel, carrying its patrons through the long night, and the storytellers were its navigators. Their voices, rough and unpolished, were the wind that filled its sails, guiding it through the darkness. In their tales, you glimpsed the resilience of the medieval soul, a resilience that lives on in every story told, every dream shared, every quiet moment of connection that defies the cold of the world outside. The drunken night and the long dreams. As the final story faded into the air, heavy with the scent of wood smoke and stale ale, the medieval tavern settled into a peculiar kind of silence. It wasn't the hollow quiet of absence, but a warm, enveloping stillness, like a thick woolen blanket draped over the chaotic, crowded room. Some patrons had already surrendered to sleep, their chins resting on folded arms, their breath heavy and uneven, chests rising and falling in the fitful rhythm of slumber. Others, too weary to move far, had crawled onto benches, curling up like stray cats seeking shelter from the cold. The soft snores, faint groans, and rustling of bodies shifting on the straw-strewn floor wove a late-night symphony, a lazy lullaby of medieval life, as hypnotic as it was unpolished. You remained in your spot, fingers tracing the rim of your empty clay tankard. A strange sensation stirred within you, a blend of detachment and intimacy, as if the world around you was both distant and close enough to touch. The candlelight blurred in your tired eyes, the hearth reduced to a smoldering red glow beneath a blanket of ash. The smells of damp straw, worn leather, and charred bread enveloped you, weaving an invisible cocoon that held you gently in its embrace. You stood, moving carefully. The straw-covered floor crunched softly under your boots, but no one stirred. In this tavern, such small sounds were just another thread in the tapestry of boring history for sleep, part of the slow, mesmerizing pulse of the night. The tavern keeper, a hulking figure like an ancient oak, leaned against the wooden counter, his eyes half closed but still sharp with awareness. He glanced at you, saying nothing, only tilting his chin toward the narrow staircase leading to the loft. The gesture was clear. A place to rest awaited upstairs, not a private room or a soft bed, but a corner to lie down, a refuge from the wind howling through the tavern's weathered walls. You climbed the stairs, each step coaxing a creak from the old wooden boards, their groans like the complaints of an elder nursing a chronic ache. The loft was shrouded in darkness, save for a faint glow spilling through a small, high window in the roof. You felt your way to an empty patch of straw, the softest spot you could find, and lowered yourself to the floor. Your back pressed against the damp straw, the air thick with the musty scent of moldering hay and lingering wood smoke. You pulled your tattered cloak over your chest, tucking your knees in close, as you might have done as a child curled beside a hearth. The rain drummed steadily on the tiled roof, a rhythmic counterpoint to the wind's soft whistle through the cracks in the walls, a lullaby sung by the earth itself. You exhaled slowly, your breath dissolving into the night like a wisp of mist, and then, like a boat slipping its moorings, you drifted into the depths of long, unbroken dreams. In your dream, the tavern reappeared, but transformed. Its roof was cloaked in vibrant green moss, as if it had stood here since before humankind walked the earth. Inside, the fire burned eternally, its golden light as warm and nurturing as a mother's embrace. The travelers, farmers, hunters, soldiers, widows, orphans, greeted you with smiles, their eyes bright with a quiet, unspoken kinship. They reached out, their rough, cracked hands offering a warmth that tightened your throat. You moved among them, wordless, fearless. An old woman, her hair white as ash, pressed a clay tankard into your hands. You looked down, expecting ale or water, but the cup held only light, a soft, shimmering glow, gentle as a smile. You clutched it tightly, knowing instinctively that in this world the truest light came not from flames but from the act of sharing. The dream flowed like an underground stream, slow and steady. You sat by the hearth, listening to a faceless man speak of ancient days when the world was young, and the fields bloomed without end. You danced in the rain with village children, your bare feet sinking into the mud, your laughter ringing like silver bells across the night. You, a lonely wanderer, found a home, not one of stone or wood, but one built from stories, smiles, and the fleeting promises carried in the tavern's smoke. Outside, the rain fell on. Inside your dream, a silent spring began to flow, soothing the parched cracks in your soul. You wandered through deep forests where wolves sang beneath a silver moon. You stood in fields of golden barley, swaying under a boundless blue sky, the wind racing like wild horses. You lived a medieval life, simple, exhausting, yet unyieldingly resilient. A life not for glory, but for the quiet triumph of existence. And somewhere, woven through the layered tapestry of your dreams, a storyteller's voice returned, soft and steady as the rain. Once upon a time, there was a tavern at the end of a dirt road, a place where lost dreams found shelter. You sank deeper, the world around you dissolving into a haze. The steady snores, the faint crackle of the fire, the ceaseless patter of rain, they blended into the softest, warmest blanket, wrapping you in their embrace. Tomorrow, when you awoke, the tavern would return to its raw reality. Noisy, grimy, cold, and stifling. But in this fragile moment, suspended between waking and dreaming, it was a miracle, a sanctuary, a beacon, a fragment of boring history for sleep, sweeter than any tale of kings or conquests. You exhaled one last time, a long, slow breath. The loft was alive with the sounds of sleep. Breaths, murmurs, the whispers of ancient dreams. Beyond the walls, dawn was still hours away. But within you, a different dawn had quietly begun to break. And as you slipped fully into slumber, a small, gentle smile curved your lips, a smile as warm and delicate as the light in the clay tankard of your dream. The tavern's dreamlike stillness was more than a pause in the night's chaos. It was a sacred space where the medieval world revealed its deepest truths. In an era defined by struggle, where every day was a battle against hunger, cold, and the whims of fate, these moments of rest were acts of defiance. To sleep, to dream, to find solace in the tavern's embrace was to reclaim a piece of humanity from a world that often sought to strip it away. This scene speaks to a universal longing, the need for refuge, not just from the elements, but from the weight of existence. The tavern, with its creaking beams and smoky air, was a haven for this longing, a place where strangers became kin, if only for a night. The dreams that unfolded here were as vital as the stories told or the meals shared, each one a thread in the tapestry of boring history that history books rarely capture. As you drifted through your dreams, you felt the tavern's deeper magic. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a vessel for the human spirit, carrying its patrons through the long night with the promise of rest and renewal. The faceless voices, the glowing tankard, the endless fields, they were symbols of resilience, reminders that even in the harshest times, there was beauty to be found in connection, in imagination, in the quiet act of dreaming. The medieval world, with its hardships and fleeting joys, was not so different from our own. Its people, like us, sought warmth, meaning, and a place to belong. In the tavern's glow, you glimpsed the enduring spark of humanity, a spark that burns through centuries, carried in every dream, every shared breath, every moment of stillness that defies the cold of the world outside. The tavern was a testament to this spark, a fragile but unyielding monument to the power of community, woven from the simplest acts of kindness and the longest, most restorative dreams. Dawn over the medieval village. As the first rays of light slipped through the weathered cracks in the tavern's wooden roof, the medieval tavern remained in a drowsy slumber. The distant crow of a rooster echoed from the far reaches of the village, mingling with the faint patter of lingering rain, a slow, hesitant chorus rousing the earth after a long, weary night. You opened your eyes slowly, the world coming into focus through a haze of sleep. The air was thick with the musty scent of dry straw, the faint bitterness of old wood smoke, and the sour tang of spilled ale. There were no chiming clocks, no urgent hum of traffic, only the soft, uneven breathing of sleeping strangers and the occasional creak of the loft's timbers as someone shifted in their dreams. You sat up, your body heavy, your tattered cloak still wrapped around you like a cocoon. Every joint ached, creaking in protest as you moved. The chill of early morning seeped into your skin, sharp and bracing, but it didn't feel unwelcome. Instead, it felt real, a reminder that you were alive, grounded in this fleeting moment of a medieval dawn. Your bare feet brushed the soft straw as you stood, careful not to disturb the quiet. You made your way to the narrow staircase, its ancient boards groaning under each step, their complaints a familiar refrain in the tavern's morning song. Descending into the main room, you were met with a scene that was quintessentially medieval. a snapshot of life in all its raw, unpolished beauty. The tavern was bathed in the pale, silvery light of dawn, like a ship washed ashore after a stormy night. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, a jumble of drunken storytellers, gamblers who'd wagered their last coin, and travelers too weary to seek a proper bed. Near the hearth, a few early risers were already stirring, coaxing the embers back to life with handfuls of kindling. The faint crackle of the fire was a promise of warmth to come. The tavern keeper, a towering figure as solid as a boulder, stood behind the counter, stirring a pot that filled the air with a rich, savory aroma. The scent, greasy, slightly charred, with a hint of sweetness, roused your hunger instantly. It was the classic morning fare of the medieval tavern. A thick stew of beans, onions, and scraps of smoked meat, served with slices of dark, rock-hard bread. It wasn't a delicacy, but it was enough. Enough to sustain you, enough to fuel the start of a new day. You found an empty chair near the hearth, its warped back and wobbly legs creaking as you settled in. In this moment it felt as luxurious as a throne. The tavern keeper handed you a bowl of steaming stew, its cracked clay surface warm against your chilled hands. You brought the spoon to your lips, sipping slowly. The stew was dense and hearty, its fatty richness spreading through you like a small, steady flame. Each bite carried the sharp bite of onions, the earthy depth of beans, and the faint smokiness of meat, grounding you in the present. You ate unhurriedly, savoring the warmth. No one rushed. In the boring history for sleep of the medieval world, mornings unfolded as slowly as the night, each moment stretching like the first light creeping over the horizon. Through the small window, you saw the rain had finally eased. Tiny droplets clung to the wooden frame, sparkling in the soft glow of dawn. Beyond, the fields of wheat shimmered gray-silver in a veil of mist, while thatched roof huts emerged like small islands in a sea of fog. The village was waking, its pulse slow but steady. A yawn broke the quiet, long and unself-conscious. A soft chuckle followed, then the low murmur of greetings exchanged in hoarse, sleep-roughened voices. An old woman adjusted her shawl, hefted a basket, and shuffled toward the door. A child, wiping their face with a grubby sleeve, scampered after their mother, their footsteps light on the straw. You sat there, the stew cooling in your hands, watching the medieval world stir to life bit by bit. There was no haste, no shouting, just the slow, tired, peaceful movements of people greeting the day, as deliberate as the sun climbing the distant hills. The tavern keeper swept the scattered straw with a coarse broom, his motions unhurried, almost meditative. You realized that here, time didn't march to the tick of minutes or hours. It flowed with the rhythm of actions, the sweep of a broom, the sigh of the wind, the steady breaths of those who lived. A hunter paused at the tavern's threshold, his bow slung across his back, his leather satchel smelling of damp forest. He nodded a greeting and stepped inside, his boots leaving faint prints on the floor. A merchant, his cloak streaked with mud, arrived next, lugging a small sack of rare spices brought from the city. A wandering monk in a gray robe, his gaunt face lit by fervent eyes, settled in a corner, his hands clasped in silent prayer. You watched these fragments of life weave together, simple yet enduring. Each person carried a story, each one adding a thread to the rough, resilient tapestry of the new day. And you, the quiet observer, were a single stitch in that vast design, small but inseparable from the whole. The rooster crowed again, its call sharper, more insistent. A new day had truly begun. Out there, work awaited, plowing fields, mending nets, herding sheep, bartering salt, trading furs, hauling goods along muddy tracks. The medieval world was never gentle. It demanded labor, resilience, and a stubborn will to endure hunger, cold, and endless rains. You stood, pushing the creaking chair back and pulling your cloak tighter around your shoulders. Stepping outside, you were met with a rush of crisp, cold air, as pure and bracing as water from a mountain spring. You inhaled deeply, the sense of wet earth, wood smoke, and fresh grass filling your lungs, sinking into your very bones. You set out along the soft, muddy path, your boots sinking with each step. You passed makeshift gates woven from dry branches, lazy dogs curled in doorways, their eyes half open as they watched you go. You were a tiny but vital part of this vast, tranquil scene, a grain of sand in the endless tide of time, a single note in the eternal symphony of boring history for sleep. And you knew, as surely as the sun would set, that when night fell again, you would return to the tavern, to the crackle of the hearth where stories rose with the smoke, to the flicker of candlelight where long dreams drifted like clouds. The tavern, for all its grime and chaos, would always be there, its door open to weary travelers like you, as it had been for hundreds, thousands before. You smiled, walking on, carrying a piece of the previous night in your heart, a fragment of the dawn over this medieval village, simple, unhurried, and as enduring as the breath of the earth itself. The dawn in the tavern was more than the start of a new day. It was a quiet celebration of survival. In the medieval world, where each sunrise was a hard-won victory over darkness and hardship, these moments of awakening carried profound weight. The simple act of eating a bowl of stew, of greeting the morning with a nod or a yawn, was a testament to the resilience that defined this era. This scene captures a universal truth, the beauty of beginnings, however modest. The tavern, with its smoky air and creaking floors, was a microcosm of this truth, a place where the ordinary became sacred through the act of living. The stew, the broom's sweep, the rooster's crow, they were not just details but rituals, anchoring the villagers to the rhythm of existence. As you stepped into the morning, you felt the deeper pulse of the medieval world. It wasn't found in grand cathedrals or royal courts, but in the slow, steady cadence of daily life. The labor, the laughter, the quiet moments of connection that history often overlooks. These were the threads that wove communities together, creating a legacy of endurance that stretched across centuries. The village, stirring under the misty dawn, was a reminder that life persists, even in the face of scarcity and struggle. Its people, like those of every era, carried their stories forward, each dawn a new page in the unwritten chronicle of boring history. And the tavern, ever present, stood as a beacon for those stories, a place where the weary could rest, dream, and find their place in the endless, gentle flow of time. The first light of dawn had fully claimed the medieval village, its pale glow spilling over the thatched roofs and muddy paths, chasing away the last shadows of the long night. The tavern, though still stirring from its slumber, was no longer the warm, dreamlike sanctuary of the previous hours. It was now a place of transition, a crossroads where travelers gathered their strength, bid farewell, and stepped back into the relentless rhythm of the world outside. You stood just beyond the tavern's threshold, your cloak pulled tight against the morning chill. The air was sharp and clean, carrying the damp scent of earth, the faint smoke of rekindled hearths, and the fresh, green bite of grass waking under the sun. Your boots, still caked with yesterday's mud, sank slightly into the soft ground as you paused, taking in the village one last time before the road called you onward. The rooster's crow had faded, replaced by the soft clatter of daily life. A woman's voice called to a child, sharp but affectionate, as they hurried toward the fields. The low bleat of goats echoed from a nearby pen, and the rhythmic creak of a cartwheel rumbled down the path, its driver whistling a tuneless melody. The village was alive, its pulse steady and unhurried, a testament to the enduring simplicity of medieval life. He turned back to the tavern, its weathered door ajar, revealing glimpses of the chaos within. The straw-strewn floor was littered with the remnants of the night. Spilled ale, crumbs of bread, a forgotten scarf draped over a bench. A few patrons lingered, nursing bowls of leftover stew or wrapping their belongings in tattered cloth. The tavern keeper, ever the silent sentinel, moved methodically behind the counter, wiping down the rough wooden surface with a rag that had seen better days. His eyes, though tired, remained sharp, catching yours for a fleeting moment. He nodded, a gesture as much a farewell as an acknowledgement of the night you'd shared. You felt a pang in your chest, a quiet ache for the fleeting community you'd found here. The tavern had been more than a shelter. It had been a crucible for human connection, a place where strangers became companions through shared meals, stories, and games of chance. The laughter, the whispered secrets, the warmth of the hearth, they had woven you into the fabric of this place, if only for a night. Now, as you prepared to leave, you carried those moments with you, small embers to light the road ahead. You adjusted the strap of your small pack, its weight a reminder of the journey still to come. The road stretched out before you, a winding ribbon of dirt and gravel that disappeared into the misty fields. It was a path of uncertainty, promising neither safety nor comfort. But it was yours to walk. The medieval world was unforgiving, its challenges as constant as the seasons. Yet it was also a world of resilience, where every step forward was a quiet victory. As you began to walk, the village unfolded around you, each detail etching itself into your memory. The huts, their roofs sagging under the weight of time, stood like sentinels along the path. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, blending with the morning fog. A group of children, their faces smudged with dirt, chased each other through the mud, their laughter sharp and bright against the quiet. An old man, his back bent from years of labor, led a mule laden with firewood, his slow, deliberate steps mirroring the rhythm of the village itself. You passed a small church, its stone walls weathered but sturdy, its wooden door adorned with a simple iron cross. The faint sound of a monk's chant drifted through the air, a solemn counterpoint to the village's waking hum. You paused, struck by the contrast between the sacred and the mundane, the prayers rising to the heavens and the earthy human bustle of the world below. In this moment, the medieval village felt like a tapestry, its threads woven from faith, labor, and the quiet joys of survival. Your thoughts drifted back to the tavern, to the people who had shared its warmth. The storyteller with his scarred face spinning tales of a night with nothing but courage. The young woman whose soft voice conjured worlds of talking mice and cursed wanderers. The gambler who wagered his coat and laughed when he lost. Each had left a mark on you, their stories and smiles lingering like the aftertaste of the tavern's cloudy ale. They were strangers, yet they had offered you a fleeting sense of belonging, a reminder that even in a world of hardship, connection was possible. The road curved gently, leading you past fields of barley and rye, their stalks swaying in the morning breeze. The mist was lifting now, revealing the rolling hills beyond, their slopes dappled with the first light of day. You felt a quiet resolve settle in your chest. The tavern had given you more than rest. It had given you a glimpse of the medieval soul, a spirit forged in the crucible of scarcity and sustained by shared humanity. That spirit would carry you forward, through the mud and the cold, through whatever lay beyond the horizon. You thought of the tavern keeper, his silent authority anchoring the chaos of the night. His presence had been a constant, a steady hand guiding the tavern through its raucous highs and quiet lows. He was no king, no lord, yet he wielded a power greater than any crown, the power to create a space where stories were told, where laughter drowned out sorrow, where strangers found solace. You wondered how many travelers had passed through his doors, how many nights he had stood watch, his eyes scanning the room for signs of trouble or need. He was the heart of the tavern, and in his quiet vigilance, you saw the strength that held the village together. The path grew narrower, the village receding behind you. You passed a lone oak, its gnarled branches stretching toward the sky, a silent witness to countless dawns like this one. A flock of sparrows burst from the tree, their wings a soft flurry against the stillness. You stopped, turning to look back. The tavern was now a small, dark shape against the rising sun. Its chimney smokes a thin thread rising into the sky. It seemed smaller from this distance, yet its presence loomed large in your mind, a beacon of warmth in a cold world. You resumed walking, the crunch of gravel under your boots a steady rhythm. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was not daunting. The tavern had taught you something vital, that even in the harshest times, there were places of refuge, moments of joy, people who would share their fire. These were the truths that fueled the medieval world, the quiet miracles that history rarely recorded, but that shaped its heart. As you walked, you imagined the tavern tonight, when the sun sank and the candles were lit once more. New travelers would arrive, their boots muddy, their faces weary. They would find seats by the hearth, sip cloudy ale, and tell their own stories. The tavern keeper would watch, his rag moving in slow circles, his eyes catching every glance. The cycle would continue, night after night, a testament to the enduring power of community in a world that demanded so much from its people. You felt a quiet gratitude for the night you'd spent there, for the stories that had lulled you to sleep, for the stew that had warmed your bones, for the fleeting sense of home. The medieval world was not a place of ease, but it was a place of strength, where every small act of kindness, a shared bowl, a laugh, a tale, became a victory over the darkness. You carried that strength with you now, a silent companion on the road ahead. The sun climbed higher, its light warming your face. The hills grew clearer, their contours sharp against the sky. You didn't know where the road would lead, but you weren't afraid. The tavern had given you a gift, the knowledge that no matter how far you wandered, there would always be a place like this. A smoky, chaotic haven where stories were born, where dreams were sheltered, where the boring history for sleep wove its quiet magic. You smiled, your steps light despite the weight of your pack. The village was behind you now, but its spirit walked with you, a soft echo of laughter, firelight, and the promise of another night, another tavern, another chance to belong. The departure from the tavern was not just a physical leaving, but a moment of transformation. In the medieval world where survival was a daily gamble, the act of moving on, of stepping back into the uncertainty of the road, was a quiet act of courage. The tavern, with its warmth and camaraderie, was a reminder that such courage was fueled by connection, by the small human moments that history often overlooks. This chapter captures a universal truth, the power of fleeting encounters to shape us. The tavern, with its rough tables and smoky air, was a microcosm of this truth, a place where strangers became allies through the simple acts of sharing food, stories, and laughter. These acts were the lifeblood of the medieval world, the threads that wove communities together in the face of hardship. As you walked away, you carried the tavern's lessons with you, that resilience is born in community, that stories are as vital as bread, that even in the darkest times, there is light to be found in the presence of others. The medieval village, waking under the dawn, was a testament to this resilience, its people rising each day to labor, to love, to live. Their stories, unrecorded in chronicles, were the true history of the era, the boring history that pulsed with the quiet, enduring strength of humanity. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was also a continuation of the tavern's legacy. Every step you took was a step toward new stories, new connections, new dawns. The tavern, and places like it, would always be there, waiting to welcome the weary, to offer a seat by the fire, to remind the world that even in its hardest moments, there is warmth, there is hope, there is home. If you're still hearing my voice, thank you for staying with me until the end of the story. If you've already drifted off into sleep, that's perfectly fine too, because these stories don't need to be heard all the way through to touch the heart. Tonight, carry with you a little warmth from the medieval tavern, a little peace from the muddy village roads, and a little light from the hearth that told you tales of medieval life. Simple, yet eternal. Wishing you the gentlest dreams, and until we meet again, in another journey, through the quiet world of boring history for sleep. Sleep well.